Mysticism and materialism. I like it.
Well, that's just the title. This is the kind of language he uses in Human and Cosmic Thought, where he has there's 7 moods. So this chapter is in the mood of mysticism, and then he uses kind of astrology language. It's mysticism and materialism, kind of like such and such planet and such zodiac, or I don't know how that works in astrology, but
Yeah.
it's kind of like the language of astrology, mysticism in materialism. These next two are the same in each case, which this is a case study of backyard apples. So we're trying to find an example of chapter 3 of the domain is the thinking process. The thing that I saw in this one is that there's many subdomains within domains within domains, which is just a set of thoughts within a broader set of thoughts that relate. So the overall domain is the thinking process of chapter 3, and then there's each topic has a subdomain. Instead of perceived content and thought content, I put set of percepts and set of concepts, which is the domain. So the first domain in topic 3.1, it's everyday thinking, where thinking is kindled. So I have the statement, falling apples kindles thought of ripe apples. So that was the person's experience. So the set of percepts it's a story about his backyard apple tree and apples. So the set of percepts is the apple tree and fallen apples. So he walked out in his backyard and saw the apple tree and apples were falling to the ground. So the set of concepts that were kindled was that of his experience that falling apples means they are ripe. So that was kind of automatically kindled in his mind when he saw the apples on the ground. So that describes that particular experience of thinking. Then the next one, mysticism and spiritism. The subdomain, which is the aspect of thinking. So you have the main thinking process, then the main subdomain is the aspect of thinking, which here is events call up a certain set of concepts from 3.2. And then I guess you'd call the set of concepts would be another subdomain. In fact, I didn't come up with a name for that. If you've got the domain, the subdomain, and then there's I don't know if there's an additional, the sciences they have categories, domains, subdomains, and then they've got a whole list of different categories. So I don't know what the next category would be if it's just another subdomain.
Most likely, or what are they, like the genus and they have a whole name for each level, which it's something we could play with. But I'm curious with this one. So in my mind, if it's mysticism and spiritism, wouldn't it have to be some aspect of the apple that has some immaterial property, like health, like apples are healthy? That's what I used in my example, but I guess you're using the concept would be knowledge of apple harvesting and processing. How does that relate to the spiritism, I guess?
The event calls up a set of concepts. These are concepts of apple harvesting and processing. So that's why it says knowledge of apple harvesting and processing.
But shouldn't that concept be in the spiritual domain or the immaterial domain, or it doesn't have to be? I guess, like, what makes this mysticism and spiritism? What about this example makes it part of spiritism?
The spiritism really in the philosophy of freedom under this, the second topic that always appears. If you look at all the, in fact, I could do that. When you look at the topics that it comes up under, it's mostly under thinking. Spiritual activity, in a sense, in the philosophy of freedom is thinking activity, things that are expressed through thinking activity within kind of this active I with an intention. So In 1.2, you've got the freedom of choice, which is this active self, making a choice. In 2.2, you get spiritualistic theory, which is the way he describes spiritualistic theory is that the world is a product of the mind, the self. The self produces the world. Then you've got the concept formed through my activity at 3.2, and in 4.2, it's thinking refers to concept. So you've kind of got this conscious aware I with an intention involved in things, where the previously in materialism, you kind of have an unconscious I self that's just kind of reacting to things automatically, more so like a collectivist, something like that, where they're just kind of programmed. 4.2, thinking refers to concept. 5.2, making a thinking assertion. See, here's the intention. That what they're asserting is, something that came out of thinking. The spiritual realm, in a sense, is the conceptual realm, the pure conceptual realm. That's the pure spiritual realm in the philosophy of freedom. Here, thinking connects an intuition with the percept. The pure concept is that pure spiritual element. Doesn't have material in it. It's a pure spiritual essence. The concept is the essence of matter, of physical things. So it's the spiritual essence. You've got the cognitive power of self at 7.2. Spiritual force, moral imagination comes under here. And then the mysticism and realism is the subdomain of the thinking process is full attention on the object, which is, so its full attention is on the harvesting. As a realist, when you're involved in the work, your full attention is on your work, on your activity. So he's busy processing the apples out of that realism aspect of thinking activity. I have the same thing here as a set of concepts, but the set of concepts will be his past experience of harvesting. Those will be his memories of past harvesting that he's calling upon. That would be the set of concepts that he's referring to, his experience of how to harvest, how to process apple butter. And now mysticism and idealism is a full attention is on past thought now. He's eating the fresh apple butter and decides it's good for human health. Let's see, the past thought is the activity of producing the apple butter, and he did it in a healthy manner. So he sees that this is, by eating this, it's good for his health. That's the idealism, in that he's progressing his health, he's advancing his health. So then I thought, well, what is the value of this kind of stuff? And then I thought, well, what's really of value is moving through the 12 worldviews.
Correct.
For example, in Human and Cosmic Thought, Steiner says, he calls it cosmic logic. That is very broad-minded. He says the main problem with thinking is that it's narrow-minded. So what we need to be is broad-minded. And Steiner used this thinking, throughout the philosophy of freedom, and I'm sure he's used it many other places. I mean, it's basically Steiner thinking. He says it's kind of like thinking the way the gods think, and he calls it cosmic logic. And basically it consists of starting out with a theme, a topic, and then viewing it through 12 worldviews, because that's the only way you can come to truth, because there's 12 sides of truth. So if you want to really present the truth of something, you can't give one view, you have to give all 12. We have rational thinking and reasoning and all these various kinds of thinkings that dominate. But this is a different kind of thinking of cosmic logic, has, as you can imagine, it has incredible value. If you look out in the world and people's thinking, it's very easy to identify that the main problem is one-sidedness. I mean, because we'll grasp one particular view, and then debate and argue with everybody else about holding on to our particular view, and that's at the core of all kinds of disagreements, conflicts that lead to war and everything else.
Yeah.
So here's a thinking process that in the process itself, it goes beyond that. It's not just recognizing the truth value of somebody else's worldview, but you're actually involved in the broad-mindedness. It's not just tolerance and recognition. You're actually expressing truth, broad-mindedness of truth. And I was, experimenting with that through the cards and the reflection exercise of going through all 12 views to reflect on a chapter. I didn't do as much experimenting as I wanted to do, because I seemed to always be moving on to a new project. It seemed that it was kind of leading to intuitive insight, a real strong intuitive experience by moving through this cosmic logic, that it can result in, very deep insights. So then I thought, okay, well, this is the real value. Anything you do to teach and learn and practice this cosmic logic has tremendous value. Up there is as important as anything else that we could possibly do, as important as the philosophy of freedom and everything else, to be able to practice this cosmic logic. So then I thought, okay, that makes sense. So that's where I'm kind of at now. Now I want to go back and look at this whole domain thing from that view, say, okay, how can we take this? How much do we need to be able to take this and adapt it to become a real practice of cosmic logic? So in a sense, you produce a story, then, or an example, you're basically producing an example of cosmic logic, which is where you would end up anyways, because that's what we're following. But the point is how to produce that without getting bogged down with all these micro domains, and connections and interrelationships. How much of it is important, and how much of it is just kind of like making it too complicated than it needs to be. Now, I don't know the answer to that. I was just going to take that up as a question and explore it.
It's a good question. I guess the way you could start answering it is just looking in yourself and what do you need in order to shift your thinking into another domain? So, I mean, we're all people, and we all have our own personality, and I'm probably somewhere between the material and the ideal that leads into spiritualism or something like that. I'm not a very practical person in a lot of ways. And that's my default, right? So that's how I approach thinking. That's how I approach the things that come up in my life. And that by nature is going to lead to a one-sidedness and a misunderstanding of other people. How can I actively as an individual, when I'm faced with these, with life, pause and get myself to shift? And what do I need in order to do that? What do I need to be able to identify and recognize in order to make that shift in perspective? And basically, I think we can experiment with that kind of concept and ask, well, what are the minimum things I would need to do? Well, I guess, and I'm just, again, this is all freeform thought. It's one, you have to know where you land by default. So you'd need to know what is your default mode of thinking. And then you'd have to then be able to identify what the key is in your problem. So if I got a problem with one of my kids, something benign like he won't brush his teeth, I don't know. What domain is the appropriate domain? So I need to know where I start. I need to know what the problem is and then be able to identify that problem with the appropriate domain. And then I need to know, how do I shift my thinking to think through that domain to come up with a new answer, right?
But we want to probably develop more of a conscious process, since this isn't natural for us. So you kind of have to you have to kind of consciously guide yourself until it becomes more, natural. But it does seem to line up with a natural way of thinking that you could say is our natural way of thinking, to be able to, that there's a particular sequence, just like in rational thought and cosmic logic, there's a particular sequence that is our natural way of thinking. It's the way the cosmos thinks. So it would be the most natural way of thinking. We just have to, work our way back to that.
Mm-hmm.